What's going on, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Basement Poetry Podcast. If this is your first time listening to this podcast, I want to say thank you for tuning in. I hope this is a place you feel comfortable in. And if this is your second, third, fourth, fifth time listening to this podcast, well, I want to say thank you as well. I appreciate your support and your continued listenership, should I say. I was thinking about this podcast today, and I was like, I really want to know, and I wish there was an easier way for me to know than through like email, but this is going to be up on YouTube, so go look at the YouTube video for this podcast, and I want you guys to drop some comments down below, because I started thinking, I really want to know what you guys actually think about poetry. I really want this space to be a space for people who aren't poetry fanatics, who just kind of, stumbled upon a poem one day, maybe, and you're like, wow, this was really nice. But I just have a few questions for you guys, my listenership here. And I think you guys are amazing, and thank you guys for listening, as I keep saying. But if you're listening to this podcast, I want you to think about these questions right here. 1, what are your thoughts on poetry? What do you think it's complicated? Do you think it's easy to understand? Like, what are your overall thoughts on it? Just the first thing that comes to your mind. Second, if you have a favorite poem, what is your favorite poem? That could be, a poem you heard read to you by your father, your mother. It could be a poem, like I said, a poem you stumbled upon. And 3, what is your favorite style of poetry? There's so many different types of poetry out there, especially today. You have, your classic poetry, your Shakespeare type, poetry. You have super relevant poetry now that is, the Instagram poetry that is all over the web and on all the bookshelves in like Barnes and Nobles. And then you have, your modern poetry, which is like, looking back, it seems classic, but you have that. You have contemporary poetry. And, just where in there do you, I guess, see yourself the most is what I can say. We all have different opinions on different types of poetry. And so I really just want to make this podcast about getting to know you guys and what you guys really like, to make it just a better inclusive space here. I don't want to just keep harping at the poems that I like. I try to make this podcast a very candid experience. So when I'm reading poetry to you guys, it's not like sometimes I just read that poem this morning, or sometimes it was a poem I read before, but it's a candid place, a safe place, shall I say, for those who just want to get to understand poetry a little bit more. I'm thinking about it now, I never did like a trailer for this podcast, and I probably should have did that. I might have gotten more feedback maybe, but I've always, even when I first started this podcast, it was born out of an idea of just wanting to talk about poetry more, not trying to make myself seem like some kind of poetry fanatic. I just want to have a conversation about poetry just because I like it, and I write it, obviously. But yeah, that's kind of what birthed this podcast. And so the podcast is nothing without you guys, helping me with that conversation. So please leave a comment, email me at basementpoetrypod@gmail.com, and just let me know your thoughts on poetry. Answer the 3 questions if you want, or if you just want to tell me what you think about poetry. You can even tell me you hate it If you don't like poetry, you can tell me that too. I'm not going to judge you, but I will ask you why you don't like poetry. So be prepared for that follow-up question. That is really all I wanted to say today. I don't really have a poem today. I'm kicking into gear for school, and I was shopping on Amazon today because I have to read a lot of poetry books. And there was a book, I'm just going to say this. There was a book on there that was close to $200. Now, I had never seen a poetry collection that was $200. It was a book by Amiri Baraka, and he's a poet that I just recently learned about, and I want to read his collection of poems for a paper that I'm writing. And I was like, okay, I'll just buy the book on Amazon. You know, all the books are cheap on Amazon. Most poetry collections usually run between like $10 to $20 depending, you know, but I looked on Amazon and this thing was like $150 to $200, and on sale it was like $80. So I was like, wait a second, like this book is like this must be some kind of like super classic book that I never knew about. And so that's a little bit of what I've been kind of going through recently. I'm still reading poetry as much as I can. I'm going to be reading a lot more in the coming months. So there will be a lot of different poetry read on this podcast coming up because I'll be reading a lot more, and then you will be also getting that. So when I read a poem and I really like it, you'll be able to know. And then if you guys want to send me a poem to read, I can do that too. So thank you guys for rocking with me so far. This has been amazing, and I'm just going to keep going and try to keep making this better for all of us. This has been the Basement Poetry Podcast. Until next time, peace.